Okay, good afternoon, everybody, or hello in case you are joining us from somewhere else. And welcome to Climate Talks. My name is Eri Saikawa, and I'm an associate professor of environmental sciences and the director of science, policy, and community engaged research at the Resilience and Sustainability Collaboratory at Emory University. It is already September, and I realized that it has been a year and 5 months since I started this webinar series. We are seeing a rapid rise in COVID cases, and it seems as though we will still need to be adjusted to this new normal for a while. Initially, I was hoping that we could have this talk in person, but I am glad that we are able to reach more people by having this on Zoom. Emory Climate Talks is made possible by our anonymous donor that supports our trip to the UN climate change negotiations. And Emory Climate Talks is in partnership with the Department of Environmental Sciences and the Resilience and Sustainability Collaboratory at Emory University. I would like to thank Leah Thomas for doing all the work behind the scenes for this website as usual, and for Emory Climate Talks in general. Thanks also goes to Kiara Brust, who has been helping us expand the social media presence for Emory Climate Talks. Just today, I was actually talking with some people at the Swiss consulate, and they were congratulating us for having a good social media presence, as well as a nice website. So I hope you are enjoying our new website, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn pages as well. And if you have any suggestions, please let us know. Before we go into today's program, I wanted to talk about some logistics and thank all the listeners for your support. Please use the chat function to address any questions you may have to the speaker at any point during the talk. We will have the time for Q&A at the end after the talk is over. And if anybody is interested in speaking up, please raise your hands and unmute yourselves when it is your turn. Most of the past talks are on the YouTube channel, and you can subscribe at youtube.com/c/Emory Climate Talks. And today's talk is recorded. It will go online in a couple of days as well. I am so excited that we have Mr. Bryan Jacob today, who is the Solar Program Director for the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, SACE for short. He has a degree in civil engineering from Georgia Tech. Before joining SACE, he led environmental initiatives for the Coca-Cola Company, and he founded Climate Coach International to help organizations design and implement practical and cost-effective climate mitigation and adaptation strategies. Now he is working on promoting solar power across the Southeast, and I believe he is one of, if not the most, or the best expert that we can have to talk about the current situation, as well as the challenges and opportunities we're facing in this region. And what is really fascinating about Mr. Jacob is that he is also a 9-time U.S.A. champion in weightlifting and participated twice in the Olympic Games. This was also a part of the reason why I wanted this to be in person so that I could get an autograph from Mr. Jacob. But I'm still very excited that you can share your expertise with us. So I look forward to hearing the work that you do, and hopefully we get to hear your personal journey as well and how you got here. Thank you so much for your time, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Yeah, once we get beyond COVID, then I can come down there and sign an autograph for you. I hadn't been asked to sign an autograph in years because that weightlifting, well, was 92 and 96, Barcelona and Atlanta. So it's been a while. But yeah, thanks for having me tonight or this afternoon, letting me share observations about how solar can help the Southeast utilities achieve a 100% clean electricity future. A little bit more about SACE before I move on. If anybody's not familiar with the organization, it's the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy. We say SACE, just like Eri mentioned. It's a nonprofit clean energy advocacy organization. We promote responsible and equitable energy choices throughout the Southeast. And well, we define the Southeast as really 7 states: Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi. lay that out there. It's the markets that tend to be traditional regulated monopoly markets where we don't have a regional transmission organization, independent system operator. There's no wholesale market in the Southeast. The two concepts that I'm wanting to weave together are, again, how solar can help to achieve a 100% clean electricity future. So those derive from two reports that we did recently, both back in June. And I'll seed the conversation with a couple slides out of each of those reports. Solar in the Southeast is one where I'm the lead author. The other one is about achieving a 100% electricity future, and it's got resource portfolios. I was a contributing author on that one. But I'll put those two together for you with a few additional things, and then we can take the conversation wherever you'd like to. And I do at the end, by the way, have links to each of those reports in case anybody wants to look at the rest of them, because I'm just cherry picking a few slides here and there. But then that Solar in the Southeast report, this is the fourth annual. I do this one every year since I joined SACE. And I just finished my fourth year with SACE, by the way. We always look back 1 year. So we published this in June of 21, but our base year was looking back to 2020. And then we always do a 4-year forward-looking time horizon as well with our forecasts. So looking back at 2020, there was right around 13 gigawatts of solar in the Southeast, a little bit less than 13, 12.7 gigawatts. And broken down by state, North Carolina was still the leading state of the Southeast, followed by Florida, and then Georgia, South Carolina, and then a token contribution you can see here from Tennessee, Mississippi, and Alabama. So that was 2020. Already in 2021, even in the first quarter of 2021, Florida overtook North Carolina to be, the state of the Southeast that has the most installed solar capacity. And our forecast also showed that within the next 4 years, Georgia will overtake North Carolina. Now, if you, any of you may have read the article in the Wall Street Journal last week, earlier this week, kind of all runs together. Can't remember exactly when it was, but the Wall Street Journal had an article that talked about solar in Georgia and how it was driven by market forces rather than mandates. And I'm a little concerned that that might lead readers to the wrong conclusion, because up until very recently, North Carolina was not only the state of the Southeast that had the most solar, it was the second most in the country behind California. And only very recently, last year, Texas overtook North Carolina. And then, as I've indicated earlier this year, Florida has now overtaken North Carolina. But North Carolina was indeed driven by a mandate. It's the only state in the Southeast that has a renewable portfolio standard. And that was what catalyzed that movement that caused North Carolina to get ahead of every other state except California. So yes, we've not had a mandate in Georgia, and Georgia is moving due to market forces, but I don't want that to imply that mandates don't work, because they do work. And I'd love to look at the scenario where we do both, right? The market forces are what they are. Price of solar has dropped 90% in the last decade. So yes, utilities are embracing it because it's the most cost-effective resource they can put in moving forward. But if we did that and there was some form of mandate or incentive, and I'll come back and talk about that a little bit later on, then imagine how we could really move forward in a much more transformative way rather than an incremental way. In our report, we not only look at the megawatts of solar that are installed, kind of the absolute capacity, but we also normalize that into what we call a watts per customer solar ratio. That's important because within the Southeast, we've got some states with a large population and some with a small population. And we've got utilities the same way, some very small ones that serve just a few thousand customers, and some very big ones like Florida Power and Light that serves 5 million, or Tennessee Valley Authority that serves 5 million. So we put that, the watts per customer ratio, it allows us to sort of say fairly compare them regardless of how big they are. And when we look at it that way, Florida does not have the most solar penetration. It's actually South Carolina that has the highest, currently followed by North Carolina. You can see the graphs that just crossed over there. And then forecasting out to about 2023, we're showing North Carolina on this watts per customer ratio going into the number 2 slot behind South Carolina. So one of the things that we do with those numbers, those ratios, is we try to identify the leaders and the laggards, not just states, but the utilities as well. The laggards we call sun blockers, and fortunately there are none of those in Georgia right now in this year's report. But the leaders we call sun risers. That's the designation that they get. And there are 2 Georgia utilities that made our sun riser list. And it's not subjective. This is a very objective mathematic ranking. It's the 7 utilities that exhibit the highest ambition measured by the difference between their last year's baseline and the 4-year forecast watts per customer ratio. So those with the biggest increase get the sunriser designation. Walton EMC is one of those. You may know that Facebook has been doing a lot of solar development, or I should say commissioning a lot of solar development through Walton EMC in that territory to service a big data center. And then Georgia Power, to their credit, has made the sunriser list again as well. That's on the basis of their 2019 IRP, Integrated Resources Plan. They do it every 3 years. So they're filing another one in January. And the first 6 months of next year will be, organizations like mine, SACE, will be intervening in that docket. And if it plays out the way that it did in 2019, you'll have Georgia Power proposing a certain resource portfolio, which will have some solar, but a whole bunch of other resources, probably a lot of natural gas, fossil gas resource, because that's what utilities seem to be putting in their plans throughout the Southeast. And then intervening parties like ours will present expert witness testimony into the docket to show that there are less expensive portfolios, other resources that could service the same needs more cost effectively. We did that in 2019. Georgia Power had proposed 1,000 megawatts of solar. At the end of that process, the Public Service Commission ordered them to do 2,210 megawatts of solar. So more than double what they originally had proposed. Again, largely because of the testimony from intervening parties like ours and others. All right, shifting gears to the other report that we did in June. SACE looked at resource portfolios for the 4 largest utility systems in the Southeast. Maybe I should back up a little bit. This was at the time or shortly after President Biden had introduced the American Jobs Plan, which included a call for a 100% clean electricity standard by 2035. Now, I'll pivot off of that and talk about the current state of play in just a few minutes, but that was the backdrop for this. And so again, SACE wanted to examine whether it was even possible for utilities in the Southeast to do that if the federal government were to mandate it. So we looked at Southern Company, which, just for clarity, is the parent of Georgia Power, Alabama Power, and Mississippi Power. The second utility we looked at was Duke Energy, who operates 3 utilities in the Southeast. They have Duke Energy Progress and Duke Energy Carolinas, both spanning across North Carolina and South Carolina. And then there's Duke Energy Florida as well. So they have 3 utilities here, and they have some others outside the Southeast region as well. But we looked at Southern Company, Duke, NextEra, which is the parent of Florida Power and Light, and now they own Gulf Power as well. Gulf Power used to be owned by the Southern Company, but there was a transaction a couple of years ago now where NextEra bought them. So FPL, Florida Power and Light, is traditionally in the peninsula of Florida, and Gulf Power was in the panhandle of Florida, kind of over toward Pensacola. So that's NextEra. And then I mentioned the Tennessee Valley Authority already. We looked at TVA. They span well, the majority of Tennessee, plus parts of northern Mississippi, northern Alabama, a little bit of Georgia. They serve about 150,000 customers here in Georgia. And then they also have a little bit of North Carolina, a little bit of Virginia, and a little bit of Kentucky. But we looked at those all, at what kind of portfolio they would need to be completely out of fossil fuels and 100% clean energy by 2035. But I will caveat that to say that for TVA, we accelerated that by 5 years because TVA is a bit unique. It's a federal monopoly utility, so owned by the federal government, and as such, we felt like they should be leading by example. It should be kind of a living laboratory of new resource technologies, and so they should be achieving the 100% clean electricity by 2030. And indeed, we were able to assemble a portfolio that would allow them to do that. And again, both my solar report and this achieving 100% clean electricity standard report are available, and I've got links at the end. For the purpose of today, I figured we'd want to focus on Georgia Power. So what I've got here is the slide out of the report that includes all three of the Southern Company subsidiaries. On the left-hand side of the slide, you've got their resource portfolios, the way their plans are forecast out to 2035. And you can see that in 2035, we're still expecting their current plans to lead to 65% of their capacity being in fossil fuels. That's the big black bars. On the three over on the right-hand side, those were the three on the left. I might have stated that wrong. The three on the right are the portfolios that SACE put together. So the one in the middle there is Georgia Power, and we were able to completely eliminate the fossil fuels and meet all of the needs. We adopted the load forecast that the utility themselves put forward. So we didn't adapt that at all. We just fulfilled it with a different set of resources. The main difference is we approached it with distributed energy resources first. That was the pathway that we chose. That's completely unusual, and it's really the polar opposite of what utilities do. They do their load forecast and then they figure out what resources they can build to provide power. We looked at it as, all right, how much energy efficiency, demand side management, and self-generation can customers do behind the meter to reduce the load or meet their load first with their own resources? And then how much does the utility need to supply them to meet the rest? And so when you prioritize distributed energy resources, that's some of the acronyms here at the bottom. It says DER focused CES. So this would be a distributed energy resource focused clean electricity standard. And in this case, for example, energy efficiency, start with that. The utility's own forecast for Georgia Power would only have them meeting the load about 0.2% would be through energy efficiency. You can't even see it at the bottom of the stack there. In our portfolio, we're meeting the load 16% of the capacity with energy efficiency and other demand side management response programs. Now, credit where credit is due, Georgia Power does have a pretty significant amount of solar in their forecast, about 17% by their own plans. Ours requires more than that. We're more than doubling it, so 38% of our portfolio would be met with solar. And again, it's not just utility scale. The vast majority of what the utilities are planning is utility scale, like these large projects that you've seen. Some of them, I mean, there's one here in Georgia that's 200 megawatts. It's 1,000 acres. These are giant projects that are that are connected to the high voltage transmission system, not connected to the distribution system. So there's kind of a fundamental difference there. In ours, the 38% that's shown there, it's a combination of distributed solar. So what individual households would have on their rooftops or small businesses would have, or even perhaps some community solar programs that might be distribution connected, but physically in the communities where people live. And then there's a fair amount of utility scale solar as well. The distributed solar component, as the bullet suggests, would meet about 10% of the total load in 2035. And then there's a combination of other resources. Historically, people don't think that there's much wind resource in Georgia, but we do have, let's see, what's the number there? 16% from a combination of onshore and offshore wind. So there is more resource for Georgia that's possible than people give credit for. Nuclear is a part of this portfolio. I should mention that. Y'all may know that the only nuclear plants currently under construction in the entire United States are right here in Georgia. Plant Vogtle units 3 and 4, and they're 6 years behind schedule and about $14 billion over budget, but they will eventually come online and be contributing. In Georgia Power's own forecast, that would meet about 10% of the load in 2035. Not just units 3 and 4, but the existing units 1 and 2 as well. So it's sort of interesting when you look at our forecast and we're saying it only meets 8% of the load. Well, that's because a lot of our other resources that we're building into that forecast don't operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Solar obviously only operates when the sun is shining. The capacity factor for solar on a full year basis is generally about 25%. So our total capacity in our resource portfolios is more than the total capacity of the Southern Company's own resource portfolios. And so when the nuclear is the same in the numerator of theirs as it is in ours, but our denominator is bigger, that's why it only equates to 8% in our forecast. Hopefully that made sense. So this is a slide from the appendix, and I'm not intending to talk about all the different numbers on here. I really just wanted to put it in and focus on a few that I've highlighted there to illustrate the difference between the utility scale solar and the distributed solar components. So if you look at the section toward the middle there, that's the Georgia Power 2035 lines, and the top line in their section is the current utility plan. And you're reading across, they are already projecting about 4.7 gigawatts of large scale solar, utility scale solar. And that's a pretty good, respectable number. It's not enough to get to 100% clean electricity. You got to do more, but not a whole lot more. Our forecast is for 76% more utility scale solar than they're already planning on their own. So 8.3 gigawatts instead of the 4.7. Where our forecast is radically different is on distributed solar. And again, it gets back to the rationale behind our report, right? Our primary pathway is focused on distributed resources first. So the forecast for Georgia Power under kind of a business as usual scenario would only have them at 463 megawatts of distributed solar. And in order to prioritize that and to get to the portfolio that we put forward, they would need to increase that by about 12 times. They need over 6 gigawatts of distributed solar. So that's going to require a kind of a fundamental change in policy and even perhaps in the business model of the utilities. So I'd say fortunately help is on the way. As a part of President Biden's American Jobs Plan, I kind of mentioned that already, he talked about 100% clean electricity by 2035. The polling on that suggests that it's a winning strategy for our elected officials. SACE had supported some polling back in June as well with data for progress, and it showed that Georgia voters support this kind of policy by a wide margin, a 42% margin. So 67% support, only 25% oppose. And you can see the breakdown by those that are registered Democrats versus Republicans versus independents. The other thing that I would share about this is we've moved on a little bit since this time frame. Any of you that have been watching what's going on in DC, that clean electricity standard 100% by 2035 did not survive in the bipartisan infrastructure plan that the Senate approved. The only thing that really was included in that is electricity related is about $70 billion of transmission upgrades, traditional core infrastructure. So the rest of the package that the president really wants is now being considered as a part of a budget reconciliation process. And the budget reconciliation process, in order to pass the rules of the Senate, it's being put together in the House right now, but when it gets over to the Senate, it has certain criteria that the Senate parliamentarian has to approve. One of those is that it can only go out a maximum of 10 years. So the parts of this clean electricity standard that would be embedded into the budget reconciliation process can't go out to 2035. They really can only go out to 2030. And they have to be budget relevant. It can't be a mandate in the traditional sense of a policy. It has to be monetary, so tax or spend related. So what's being considered right now, and was part of the budget resolution that was passed by the House, so now it's to the committees to allocate the different components of it, is a clean electricity payment program. Right now it stands at about $150 billion. And we kind of jokingly say it will pay utilities to do the right thing. But the utilities have been saying that they need incentives. Tom Fanning is the CEO of Southern Company, and he's on record as saying that his utilities have a goal to be net zero by 2050. But if the federal government would offer a package of carrots and sticks, but heavy emphasis on the carrots, they want the incentive side of that, then they'd be able to expedite that transition. They decarbonize faster if the federal government puts some money on the table. So that's what Congress is trying to do right now, to the tune of $150 billion, like I said. Right now, the schedule is that it will be marked up in the House Ways and Means Committee on September 13th, a week from Monday at 11 o'clock in the morning. So you can mark your calendars now, and I'm sure it'll be riveting television. Let's see, a couple more things before we kind of open it up. Zooming back, very local now. One of the reasons that Georgia Power, that Georgia as a state, but Georgia Power individually as a utility doesn't have very much distributed solar in that current forecast, is that up until very recently, Georgia Power didn't offer any form of net metering. And for any of you not familiar with it, net metering is the policy construct that most states have been using in the United States for the last decade to make sure that if people put solar on their rooftop, that they would get a fair value for any time that they're generating more than they're consuming. And they might be dispatching that excess power back out to the grid, because all the utility's doing is redistributing it from them to their neighbors, and they're charging the neighbors full retail for it. So net metering effectively allows the person that made the investment in that rooftop solar and might have spent $25,000 or $30,000 to earn the fair value of it, as opposed to letting the utility take it from that person at wholesale and sell it to their neighbor at retail. So Georgia didn't have any of that until very recently. And there's an issue now that when it was introduced, I'll add one other caveat to that, in fact. even when the Public Service Commission ordered Georgia Power to start offering a form of net metering, it wasn't true net metering. It's what they call monthly netting. So yes, they're now netting within the calendar month, but if there's an excess at the end of the month, they're paying that back at the avoided cost rate, the wholesale rate, as opposed to carrying those excess kilowatt hours to the next month and the following month and netting it out over the course of an entire year, which is what's much more common. And then only at the end of a 12-month year, if you've got a net excess, the utilities would pay the customer at the wholesale rate. So Georgia didn't go there. Georgia Power was required to offer monthly netting, and it was capped. It was only going to be offered to the first 5,000 customers or 32 megawatts. 32 megawatts represents about 0.2% of Georgia Power's demand. So it's a pretty low threshold, pretty insignificant. My organization was part of a settlement with Duke Energy in the Carolinas, primarily because their affiliates, both Duke Energy Progress and Duke Energy Carolinas in South Carolina and Dominion Energy South Carolina as well, all three of them had achieved 2% penetration with rooftop net metering. And in order to prevent that industry from cratering, we negotiated a settlement that would be kind of the next evolution of net metering for those markets where it was necessary. Here, we're talking about a penetration that's 1/10 of that. And we've hit that 5,000 customer limit already. The industry is very concerned about this market in Georgia grinding to a halt. So there's a big movement right now called Scrap the Cap, where people are asking the Public Service Commission to eliminate that cap. And what I've included on the slide here is both an article about it that was in Solar Power World magazine. I'm sure all of you read that. And then also a post that I did because the commissioner, Tim Eccles, who originally introduced this net metering motion back, it was in the Georgia Power's rate case in 2019. He has asked for customers to tell them, reach out and explain to the commissioners why they need to lift the cap. And so I say we take him up on it. If you're a customer of Georgia Power, reach out and encourage the commission to scrap the cap. Last slide here. My organization, SACE, is very action oriented, just as an organization, and I suspect that many of you are as individuals as well. So I wanted to put a slide together that would maybe satisfy your compulsion for action. One of the things we have right now is an online action form that will allow you to send a letter to your elected officials, whoever your representative is, and both of our senators, Ossoff and Warnock, letting them know that you support a clean electricity payment program, as I've described it, currently being contemplated in the budget reconciliation package. So it's 80% by 2030, because that will conform to the Senate rules for reconciliation. But that's also on the pathway, on the trajectory to 100% by 2035. So it's consistent with what the president was putting forward in the American Jobs Plan. So that when we circulate these slides, the hot links will work. You can click on that button, it'll take you right to it. You can customize it if you want to, and then send it on its way. You put your address in so it can know which representative to send it to. We've got a template form of a letter to the editor. And if you're so inclined, you could adapt that to your liking and submit it to whatever journals or newspapers you might be interested in. My communications colleagues could certainly even help with that. The template is there for use at your leisure, but if you'd want any additional help, you can reach out to me and I can put you in touch with them. I've already mentioned that reaching out to the commission here in Georgia about scrapping the cap on monthly netting, that would be great and very timely. And then while you're at it, we're also in the midst of a docket with them to allocate the costs of Unit 3, and it's not even all of the cost of Unit 3 at Plant Vogel. It's just the first tranche of cost for Unit 3. It was what they spent up through the end of 2015, and now they're asking to put that into base rates as soon as it comes online sometime next year. But we're in the midst of the docket to figure that out right now, how those costs should be allocated to which customer classes, and reaching out to them to express that it should be allocated fairly and equitably would be useful. Because back when they allocated what's known as the NCCR, the Nuclear Construction Cost Recovery Tariff, which Georgia Power customers have been paying now for 10 years, and the units aren't complete yet. The large industrial customers did not shoulder their fair share of that burden. The vast majority of it went on to residential customers. We want to make sure that the residential customers, particularly the low income customers, don't have to shoulder the excess burden of these new nuclear units that are that probably weren't even needed in the first place. But now that they are, they're, as I mentioned before, 6 years past due and double the original budget. So fair and equitable allocation would be a good thing to ask for now. When we look forward into 2022, I started thinking about what opportunities there will be. There's a bill that was introduced in the Senate this past session, but it was introduced after crossover day, so it couldn't be considered in this legislative session. It has to wait until January. But Senate Bill 299 will take that monthly netting concept that only applied to Georgia Power, not to any of the municipal utilities or the co-ops in Georgia, and it would make it the law of the state. So it would lift the cap, number one, so Georgia Power we would have to continue offering it, even though they've already got 5,000 customers on that. And then it would also require the municipal utilities and the co-ops to offer a similar monthly netting process so that people who invest in solar can get fair valuation for it. And that has both Republican and Democratic sponsors on it. It was deliberately crafted to focus on the local jobs aspects, because there are a lot of local solar installers that their livelihoods really depend on this. And a lot of obviously local customers who want the opportunity to do solar and want it to be fair and economically attractive for them to do that. We'll also have both an IRP, an integrated resource plan, in the first 6 months of next year, and then a rate case in the second 6 months of next year. So 2022 is going to be kind of busy. And there's ways to get involved in that too. As individuals, whenever there's a hearing, a public hearing at the Public Service Commission, they allow public comments. Generally, you're limited to 3 minutes, and you sign up in the morning before the hearing starts. While we're in this online format for hearings, it's a little more complicated. They require you to submit letters in advance, and they put them into the docket. So both the staff of the commission and the commissioners do see those comments, but they're just delivered a little bit differently. And then on the right-hand side of the slide, I put the links for the 2 reports, and then also that poll that I mentioned that we did with Data for Progress. So you can have all that. And those are the slides I had prepared. Let's see what kind of questions people might have.
Great, thank you so much. I'm giving the clapping from everybody in a way, but yeah, that was very informative and so much about what's going on in the, in DC and also in Georgia. So thank you so much for giving such a great overview of that. I would like to invite everybody to raise your hands if you have any questions, so that I can point you to say your question, or if you are very shy and would rather type up your questions, you're also welcome to do that. And you can just put it on the chat and I can read it out loud. Okay, Erin, go ahead.
I was just wondering if you guys do any work like regarding lowering the price for consumers to install solar panels, just because my parents thought about going solar and they just couldn't justify such a high upfront cost, even though they knew it would save them money over time.
Yeah, thanks. I'd say SACE doesn't really do anything to help lower the costs of the panels or the modules. Well, actually, maybe we do, and the overall attractiveness of the program. So you may know that there are federal tax incentives. There's an investment tax credit for solar, and it has been extended a couple different times, including the end of last year. And as a part of this overall budget reconciliation package, there are calls to further extend the investment tax credit. And that has the effect of reducing the installation cost, because right now you get a 26% tax deduction off of the value of the system. So there is that. And we have historically participated in some of the Solarize programs, if you're familiar with that concept, where organizations will group within a community, like say Solarize Decatur, because that's one that some friends of mine participated in. There'll be an initial expression of interest to the coordinator of the Solarize campaign, and then they will collectively go out to bid for that. The same developers that you might get an individual quote from will bid into that, but now they're not bidding for your home specifically. They're bidding on the package of maybe 35 homes or 90 homes, depending on how many subscribed to the program and expressed interest. And then in aggregate, it does bring the price down, because they're going to be able to buy in bulk and schedule in bulk and assign their resources to get these things all done in a close geography, just kind of one after the other. So that does have a tendency to reduce the price and make it a little more cost effective. I can send you, there are a couple Solarize programs currently underway in Georgia, and I can put you in touch with those folks if you happen to be in one of those locations. And there's similar programs in other states. There's a Solar United Neighbors program in Florida that we also participate in to try to do the same thing. Again, it's about collective action versus individual action. Hopefully that'll help.
Great, thank you so much. Now there are 3 people raising hands. In case those of you that are not sure where the raise your hand button is, it is in reactions, I believe. So let's go to Ryan now.
Hi, Brian. Just a quick question. You mentioned that there was going to be quite a large cost. I think you said 250 million to fund this operation. How money on raise that money? What was the charge? What was the process?
Okay, sorry, I was missing part of that. I may have a bit of a sketchy connection, but you talked about the amount, and I think that was for the Clean Electricity Payment Program, and it's not 250 billion anymore. It's 150 billion. Originally, it was discussed in a range, because, like I said, some utilities have been expressing interest in this whole carrots and sticks concept, and the original estimation of how much it would take is that somewhere in the range of 150 billion to 250 billion. It's already at the low end of that range, as it's been handed over to the Ways and Means Committee. So that's what we're talking about now. I don't expect them to reduce it anymore, but I also don't expect them to add to it at this point. I think it'll be 150 billion. Was there another part to your question too? Because again, it was cutting out a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I actually thought you said million, so million has left me shocked. But what the next part of the question was, where did that money come from? So how did you access that, and like, was there any challenges? Because I think if more organisations and people could access funding quicker, then it would make the transition a lot smoother and easier for businesses and whatnot. I'm not sure if you agree with that or not.
Well, I agree that that's what this is intended to do, is to make the transition easier. And the other thing that is unique and important, I think, is that this is funded through taxes. It's a tax and spend program, as opposed to funding it through rates. A traditional mandate could set the targets and timetables for a utility and mandate that they have to be this percentage renewable by this date. But if there is a cost associated with that, the only recovery of that cost, the only option they would have is to put it into rates and collect it from ratepayers. The problem with that is utility rates tend to be regressive. So they tend to have a higher burden on low income, low energy users, as opposed to the higher income, higher energy users. And so the idea of funding it instead through our tax system, which is progressive, not in the Democrat versus Republican sense, but progressive in terms of the way the percentages are applied. The more you make, the higher percentage taxes you pay. So this does it does a more equitable job of funding this transition. So that's why I think it's important that it's being handled the way that it is.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Thank you so much for that insight. I appreciate that.
Great, thank you. Next is Leah.
Hi, yeah, thanks so much for coming to talk to us today. I was wondering, so I know you like showed what the current like sources of electricity are and like what you guys like hope for, like projected. I was hoping you could kind of expand more on like how you guys got to that, and like if you like have thought of like intermediate steps, or is this kind of like this is what they could do?
Yeah, and first I got a question about your background. Is that Hands Across the Sand?
No, this is actually, there's a coal plant. This is the place I worked over the summer. And this is Waukegan, Illinois. So there's a coal plant right there. And then this is a municipal beach.
Okay. And yeah, so for the question about the utility portfolio, we basically were trying to do a proof of concept, demonstrating that kind of the art of the possible. So I won't say that our portfolios are optimized, and the modeling that the utilities do with they have very sophisticated models, very expensive models that nonprofit organizations like mine can't afford to either own or subscribe to. So that's one of the limitations that we have with this, is we were proving that it could be done, but we don't have answers to the question of, well, how much would it cost? And that's fine. We can get there over time. We pulled this together very quickly from the time the president introduced the American Jobs Plan and started talking about it until the time that we needed to release it. But it's helpful for us as we go into these integrated resource plan proceedings with the utilities to put it out there. And if we have a receptive commission, they may require the utilities to use their sophisticated tools to run our portfolio and see how much it would cost. Now, we have to be open to the results of that as well, because it may in fact cost more than what they're currently spitting out of their models as the least cost portfolio now. But there's ways to kind of counteract that too. I mentioned earlier that many of the portfolios for utilities in the Southeast are getting rid of coal, which is great, but they're replacing it with other fossil resources. They're doing combined cycle natural gas plants that are going to be around for the next 40 years. And if there is going to be an obligation from the federal government or otherwise to be out of fossil fuels by 2035, and we've spent all this money in 2020 for a 40-year asset, it's going to be retired prematurely. And when you collapse all that cost, they were expecting to be amortized over 40 years into a 15-year period, all of a sudden it doesn't look as cost effective. And that's the same thing with nuclear plants. They're part of the portfolios that we've put together because they're currently being considered as part of a clean energy resource portfolio at the federal level. And some would argue that nuclear doesn't have any place in there, and the existing nuclear needs to be closed. We have found it very difficult to backfill that extra capacity with other clean energy resources. So nuclear is in there, but to be honest, at the prices that we're seeing now, I can't imagine anybody ever building another AP 1000 unit like we're doing with units 3 and 4 at Plant Vogtle, just from a cost standpoint alone. There, at the end of the day, those are going to be a little over 1 gigawatt a piece. So that 2 gigawatts is going to cost $28 billion. We can build solar now for $1 a watt. So a gigawatt of solar would cost $1 billion. We could build 2 gigawatts for $2 billion, and we could have storage on it probably for double that. Now, and granted, solar doesn't operate year round. I think I might have mentioned that earlier. It's not a 24/7, 365 resource, but still there are other resources that could be used, and many would argue should be used moving forward, rather than committing ourselves to a legacy of fossil fuels.
Yeah, great. So there's a lot of questions now, so we want to move on. But Jackson, is your question related to this? If not, we might want to ask Wendy's question first.
My question is related to energy storage.
Okay, so is it okay I ask Wendy's question first before you go?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay,
Yeah.
so this is a little bit related. So Wendy asks, in your opinion, and other nonprofits, how realistic, achievable is switching to 100% clean electricity by 2035? What do you think is the biggest challenge in this decade to allow this?
Well, it may get to that next question about energy storage. We had a pretty substantial amount of storage necessary in our resource portfolios. So we had to overbuild with solar and wind and other renewable intermittent resources. But then in order to meet both the peak demands and the off hours, when say the solar wasn't generating, we did have to backfill with quite a bit of storage. So I'd say that the continued cost decreases of storage, and maybe even breakthroughs of storage technologies, would be the most critical thing. It is achievable, yes, but there are a few kind of precursor things that would have to happen. And one of those, I mentioned the investment tax credit that currently applies to solar. It also applies to solar with storage, as long as the storage is charged predominantly by the solar. There is a movement afoot to get an investment tax credit for standalone storage. That would be a policy mechanism that would help get more storage onto the grid, which would in turn be an enabler of more intermittent resources without causing complexities in the grid, because they would have that storage there. And it wouldn't necessarily need to be battery storage. I think that's the simplest and most common right now. But there's a lot of existing pumped hydro storage out there as well. The call I was on right before this one, we were talking about some of the pumped hydro storage facilities in North Carolina that Duke operates, and how they're not as flexible as pumped hydro storage that other utilities operates. And so maybe there's an opportunity to retrofit them and make them more flexible, because they only operate within a pretty tight band of flow and power output. So that's a long answer. The short answer is yes, it is achievable.
Great, Jackson?
Yeah, I would say that would be a pretty good answer for my first question. I did have a backup just in case that happened. So I was looking through kind of your publications about the breakdowns with energy sectors in the different states in the Southeast, and I noticed that a lot of the big, I guess, movements that you mentioned were kind of commercial movements, such as the Facebook operation that's going down the Gulf Coast. Has SACE considered any sort of strategic partnership with an organization like Renewable Energy Buyers Association, or something that acts kind of as a middleman between like large scale renewable energy corporate, I guess, companies looking to purchase from renewable suppliers, and kind of turning that increased demand into a change in legislation or any of the stipends you're talking about? Because it seems kind of like a natural fit.
Yeah, we don't partner with REBA, but I love what they do. I've known those folks since before REBA existed. I knew Miranda Ballantyne when she worked at Walmart, when I was working at Coke, and they were our biggest customer. And then Bryn Baker, when I was at Coke, we had a big relationship with WWF, and Bryn Baker was working there. So now that they're both at REBA, they're doing a fantastic job serving that cohort of progressive businesses that want to be able to get more renewables. And to be honest, they helped. I guess it wasn't branded under REBA, but Walmart in particular has testified in a number of the Southeast dockets. In fact, I mentioned the settlement that we had before Power and Light recently. I think that was earlier on this call. And Walmart was a party to that settlement as well. And Walmart was part of the 2019 IRP here in Georgia. And let me rewind and talk a little bit about how that played out. Georgia Power came into that and said they wanted to do 1,000 megawatts. I mentioned that already, but I didn't say what they wanted to do with it. They wanted to set up this program called CRISP, Corporate Renewable Supply Procurement, because they had the corporate buyers coming to them saying, we want access to more renewable energy. And that's great. So part of our testimony for SACE was to go in and said, yes, we want those corporate buyers to be able to get renewable energy. So by all means, Commission, please approve that. But here's what's going to happen. If Georgia Power ring fences the now less expensive, because the price point had already come down to where solar was putting downward pressure on rates. It was less than Georgia Power's otherwise avoided cost. So they're going to ring fence that and sell the low cost clean energy to these corporate interests. That's going to leave behind the higher cost dirty energy to be distributed amongst everybody else. And they're going to have to shoulder the burden on that. So yes, we want the corporate customers to get theirs, but we think there should be a 1-to-1 match. So if that 1,000 megawatts is going to be done for them, there should be 1,000 megawatts that goes for the general benefit of all ratepayers. And the Commission did approve that. That's how we got from 1,000 to 2,000. And then there was a separate argument that utility scale solar brings a certain amount of benefits, but distributed generation solar, smaller scale, brings a different set of benefits, and there should be some DG solar carved out. So there was 210 megawatts approved for DG specific in kind of a couple different categories. We've got the same situation with TVA right now. They've got this thing called Green Invest, where Facebook and Google and General Motors and the large universities, so Vanderbilt University, I'm trying to think of which other ones did, these Green Invest deals, which again it's like TVA was facilitating a request for proposal to get these bids in, and they were showing the bids to this group of interested parties who would contract them through TVA, and that's fine, but they're really not providing as a part of their general resource portfolio a significant amount of solar for everybody. So we're arguing with them over the same kinds of things now.
Great. Next is Emma.
Hi, so I guess my question is more focused not necessarily on solar energy, but the path from fossil fuels to to renewable energies and kind of the role nuclear power plays in that. So I've heard that like one argument for having nuclear power, even though it's not renewable, is that it acts as like a stepping stone and that we have like the infrastructure set up for it. But from what you've said about how there's not really like any more nuclear power plants being built, what is kind of the future for nuclear power, if you know that or have any insight into that? And what are your thoughts kind of like on nuclear power in the Southeast and as the country as a whole?
Yeah, thanks. I don't think I would describe nuclear power as a stepping stone to solar, but there is, I think, a legitimate argument, and some of our commissioners here like to talk about the fact that they would say nuclear is solar's best friend because it provides that base load resource that an intermittent resource can't meet, right? Because that kind of unpredictability, which is not completely accurate either for solar. And so Bubba McDonald, one of the commissioners in Georgia, likes to talk about that. And Tim Echols is a big supporter of nuclear as well. But as far as the future goes, I think I said it before, I don't really expect any utilities to be investing in new nuclear, at least not the kinds of things like the AP1000s that we're building now. I think there's a fair bit of talk about what they call small modular reactors, and I'll reserve judgment because I don't know enough about them, about the operations, about the safety, about the cost. But utilities are certainly talking a lot about that. TVA is one of those that wants to try to develop these small modular reactors.
So Brian, I guess I didn't ask you if we could go until 5:15. Is that okay? There's a lot of questions coming in.
That's perfectly fine.
Thank you so much. Ellie's next.
Hi, yeah, thanks for coming to talk to us again today. Okay, anyway, I was just going to ask about, I guess, like the space, like land area involved in solar, and if you could expand on that. I guess it seems like rooftop solar obviously reduces that if you're building on top of structures that already exist, but just in terms of, I guess, pros and cons around that, and kind of, yeah, I guess like additional pros and cons on top of like the weather variability that come with solar.
Yeah, a lot of people have been talking lately about the land requirements for solar. I guess average now is about 6 acres per megawatt, but there are some more densely configured arrays where they can get a megawatt on about 3 acres. And so a lot of the utility scale stuff is being done where land is inexpensive, right? And so it's not in close to the city. These are 50, 100, even 200 megawatt projects. The 200 megawatt project I mentioned is down in Twiggs County. It doubled the tax digest there. And it was a huge cash influx for the county. They're able to now buy, I think they built a new fire station and bought a new fire truck and new libraries, lots of public resources that are available because of the tax that's being paid on this new investment, because it's 200 megawatts, it's $200 million ish. But they're being done on land where the land is inexpensive, and the land is inexpensive for a reason. It's either not as productive as farmland as it once was, or the various reasons why it's available for either lease or purchase, and so the utilities are finding it and taking advantage of it. The companion to that, and I think I tried to emphasize it with my showcasing that our portfolio needs a lot more utility scale solar and a whole lot more distributed solar. We've adopted this kind of both and mentality. Utilities like to say, well, why would I incentivize distributed solar when I can do utility scale solar for cheaper? Because the household rooftop solar might be $2.50 a watt, whereas utility scale will be $1 a watt. And we're trying to make the case that it's not an either or proposition. We need both and, but both utility scale solar and distributed solar. And there's a lot of rooftops. In fact, what we modeled in our resource portfolio was only about a third of what the technical potential was. We started with a study that the National Renewable Energy Laboratory had done about rooftops across the country, and they had broken it down by state, and we took the available roof space in each of our states. And originally I was going to use the whole number, and we ran it, and it basically would meet all of our needs. So we thought, okay, that's probably a little too ambitious. So we downscaled it to about a third of what the technical potential was. And so that would help deal with the land issue. We wouldn't have to have as much farmland or other big tracts converted to solar because we'd have rooftop space used for it. And I would also add in one or maybe two other things. Solar can be done on land that isn't really useful for much else. I had done a study for a client back before I started working for SACE, who does landfill closures. And we looked at the amount of municipal landfill space that is already closed or would be closed. And we also looked at coal ash landfills. And so as they're properly closed, solar can be put on top of them, where again, there's not much else. You're not going to build a housing development on top of a landfill. And there's even other brownfields that could be converted to solar as well. And I would say the industry is also doing a good job now of anticipating the end of the life for solar, right? So they're doing 30-year projects, but at the end of 30 years, they're either going to repower it, replace the modules and the inverters, or it might get returned to farmland. And if in that latter case, returning to farmland, there are things that they can do up front that will help improve the soil quality over that 30-year period, and it will be more fertile at the end of the 30-year period than it was at the beginning. So it's called, it takes some of the regenerative agriculture procedures and puts them into a solar context. So there's a company out of Tennessee, but they do a lot of work in Georgia, called Silicon Ranch, who has this regenerative solar program. They graze, I was going to say sheep, but I think it's mostly goats on their properties, both for, so they don't have to mow it. So there's an advantage there, but also just the trampling of it that the goats do, and the anything the goats may leave behind is beneficial for the soils.
Thank you.
That's fascinating. Okay, I think Max has a question similar to this. Marlon, if that's okay, I will let Max go first. Okay, go ahead, Max.
Yeah, it's just a quick question. I was also thinking about utility versus like distributed production. So I don't know, it seems kind of so unpredictable, but with kind of the path we're on, do you see like most rooftops selling excess energy back to the grid? Or is it still just going to be kind of people are super passionate about installing in their own household or whatever property, taking that initiative themselves?
I think we'll see more sold back to the grid. I mean, there is a role for battery storage at homes. A lot of people are doing that so that they don't export any excess back to the grid. They retain it all and then use it themselves in the off hours. And it's also important if you're in a vulnerable geography where you might lose your power. I mean, I bet there's people in Louisiana right now that wish they had solar on their roof and a battery storage system so that they could have power, even though the transmission infrastructure is down. And a lot of people in Florida are doing battery systems at home for that same reason. But it's more expensive to do a battery at home and keep all your self-generated power behind the meter than it is for the utility to install a grid scale battery and accept your power and then let you have it again when you need it. So I think with some creative models, business models that incentivize the utilities to embrace distributed solar and potentially even own it. So if you can imagine, instead of a utility investing in a combined cycle natural gas plant, they offer to put solar on your rooftop and 1,000 other people like you, and they want your excess instead of saying that's a hassle for me and it's a complexity that I can't deal with the sophistication of the grid today, they can deal with it. So if they could find a way to make money off of it, I think they do it in a heartbeat. But right now, the business model, what you generate on your own is lost revenues to them. So we've got to be able to reposition that in a way that they can make money and it benefits society at large.
Thank you.
Marlon, next.
Hey, Mr. Jacobs. First off, I'd like to thank you for giving your time to us. But the question that I had is kind of branching off of Wendy's question about actually achieving 100% clean electricity. So my question was in regards to like the more impoverished communities. What are the challenges that that you all face in actually making that transition for those communities? And if you have already, if you have reached out to them yet?
Well, we're reaching out to them. I don't think that I don't think SACE has a lot of great solutions at the moment, but there's a lot of people that are really focused on that area. And one example is we participate in the Just Energy Circle, which is convened by the Partnership for Southern Equity. And we're trying to make sure that from an access standpoint, that, I don't know what the right term is, but disadvantaged communities or communities that have historically been left behind aren't left behind this time around. I think the president's assertion that of all I think it's called the Justice 40 initiative, that 40% of all these climate funds need to go to those communities that had historically been left behind so that they won't be left behind this time. I think that's huge. There's one of the other partners in the Just Energy Circle. It's called Groundswell, and they do community solar programs specifically targeting low-income communities. They're doing one somewhere around the Atlanta University Center now. I'm not exactly sure the details. They had done one, I think, in Baltimore, Maryland, but it's starting to come home here. So I wish I had more examples to offer and details about that one to be able to say what the solutions look like. We did, just to branch off of that, as a part of one of our settlements in Florida, actually two of them, both with FPL and with Duke, we reached an agreement on their shared solar programs and the design and structure of those, but each of them have a carve out for low income communities. So it's defined as households that were 200% or less of the federal poverty level so that they could participate in it. And it's structured to where they, it is cash flow positive for them from the very first month that they enroll, whereas the regular participation in that one has a little bit of a premium for the first several years. It gets more attractive the longer you stay enrolled in the program, and then there's a crossover point around year 7. But we asked them, we said, well, what about the people who can't afford to pay that premium up front? We need to find a way that they can participate too, and they're not excluded. And so we did manage to square that circle in both of those cases. Maybe we'll have similar options that we can push for here in Georgia.
Okay, thank you.
There's so many issues in this solar area you have to think about. There's so many opportunities and so many challenges, but that's fascinating, the discussion. There are 2 remaining questions I want to put together in the last minute or so that we have. So okay. It's related to Tim Echoes, the PSC commissioners that we've been talking about. Nadia says that she heard him say that the PSC needs to hear from the business community, encouraging them to scrap the solar cap. Do you know if there are efforts from large corporate customers like Emory, Coca-Cola, etc., who can exert more pressure on Georgia Power than individual residential customers to scrap the solar cap and increase rooftop solar? And Peter is asking, she heard Tim Echo speak on incremental progress in terms of solar and the solar cap. And in your opinion, why do you think Georgia initiated this type of solar cap?
Okay, let me maybe I'll address the first question and the second one. I'm not aware of any of the large customers really leaning in on this. I wish they would, but I understand why they might not. It doesn't really benefit them. Case in point, I was at, I live in District 6. I live in Alpharetta. I'm in Lucy McBath's district, and she was in town on Monday. We had an event down at the Dunwoody Community Center. It was a great conversation. And we chose that venue because they've got a 20 kilowatt array, not huge, about 2 or 3 times the size of a typical array on a house. It's on top of their gym, and they've got a big campus there. It's the Marcus Jewish Community Center. And we did a tour of it after the meeting with Representative McBath. And I asked the person, I said, did y'all have the opportunity to switch to monthly netting last year? And the answer was that she doesn't know. Maybe the person that pays the bill got the invitation to switch, whatever. But then it dawned on me that they've got such a big energy consumption on that campus that they're never going to be over generating. You know, even in the shoulder months of the year, say the March, April timeframe, when you've got good sun and it's not super hot yet, so you're not running the air conditioner, they still had enough other demand that 20 kilowatts was always going to be consumed on site. They'd never export. That would be the same for Emory or Coca-Cola. So the monthly netting thing is probably irrelevant to them. It's only the small customers where it makes a big difference. And again, those are the ones that I think the commission needs to hear from. And then, yeah, Eccles talking about incremental progress. We are at an inflection point in general where incremental efforts are no longer going to get us there. If you look at the IPCC report recently, I mean, the house is on fire, right? This is a clarion call. We've got to mobilize for transformative progress, not incremental. And the cap, why did they implement it? I don't have anything to justify this, but I think it was to thread the needle between what the industry needed in order to maintain viability and maintain jobs, and what Georgia Power wanted. I mean, Georgia Power wanted nothing. This was a concession in the middle, and this 5,000 customers seemed like it would be a decent test for a pilot test, a decent number for a pilot test. And I think clearly everyone underestimated it, the demand, because within the span of a year after it was first introduced, it was gone. And now we find ourselves, instead of that being kind of a lofty ambition that is propelling us forward, it's now an anchor holding us back. And that's why we need to get rid of the cap now.
Okay, thank you so much. There is so many more questions that we can be asking you to, have you for an hour more, I'm sure. But that was such great discussion, and I wanted to give you a round of applause again. Thank you so much for.
I had a question for you too. Are you taking a group to Glasgow or no?
What? Sorry. Yes, sure. You
Glasgow,
can ask.
To the conference of parties. Are you able to take a group this year or not?
We are fighting so that we can take students to the COP. Actually, we are still keeping our fingers crossed, but it's not looking that optimistic at this point. But
that's a shame. I hope things clear up and you're able to take the group.
Do you go at all?
I used to go. Now I'm regional and have a little bit of federal, but I don't do anything international. But when I was with Coke, from COP 15 in 2009 in Copenhagen, all the way up through COP 21 in Paris, I was there every year, with high hopes in some cases, and dreams that came crashing down, because I mean, Copenhagen we thought was going to be where we got the deal, and then ultimately we did get it in Paris, but obviously 6 years later than we thought we were going to. a few false starts along the way.
Okay, so now I think we met in Paris, is that correct? At the dinner that Coke hosted, maybe?
I'm not sure. I think Savannah Miller may have introduced me to you in Paris.
Yeah.
Because I had done some work with her before that. And coincidentally, with that first cohort that she was in, Taylor McNair works with me sometimes now. He's at Grid Lab, and we use them as an expert witness in some of our proceedings.
That is fantastic. So the Emory folks, Taylor McNair is an alum, and so he was doing an internship at Coke, and so it's a small world, and I hope you will be able to get this kind of opportunities as well, and hopefully we will get to go to the cup. But well, thank you so much for your time again, and hopefully we can meet in person soon. But until then, please stay safe and healthy, and we will meet next week. Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.